Andy Tai, BBC News.
And here's what's coming up on the programme. How the Chinese government is using films and flags to try and reduce public anger over the SARS crisis.
Showing the soles of your feet is one of the rudest things you can do in Thailand. And this hand gesture, in parts of Greece, would also be frowned upon. At HSBC, we never underestimate the importance of local knowledge, particularly when it comes to your money, because what we learn in one country can directly benefit our customers in another. HSBC, the world's local bank.
And I'm back with the headlines here on BBC World. Iranian leaders warn the US to stop threatening their country. President Khatami says Iraq must decide its own future. And 3 people are killed after a helicopter crashes on Mount Everest. Russia has confirmed its first case of SARS on the border with China. The man diagnosed as suffering from SARS was in Blagovyshchensk on the Amur River, which forms the frontier with China, where the disease has killed hundreds and infected thousands. The Chinese government's handling of the epidemic has come under considerable criticism, including from the World Health Organization. Chinese public confidence has been shaken by the health threat, though there are now signs that Beijing is taking the criticism seriously, as Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
The corridors of Long May's apartment building are haunted by SARS. In early April, behind this door, her neighbours suddenly began falling ill. Within a week, 2 of them were dead. A few days later, her own husband fell ill.
When I learned my husband had SARS, I didn't believe it. And the health minister on TV said there were only 5 cases in Beijing, but there were more than that in my building alone.
It's not just the likes of Long May who were angered by the way the Chinese government covered up the extent of the SARS outbreak. Here in Beijing, the streets were literally deserted for 2 weeks as the city's population fled home and locked the door. The government was suddenly confronted by widespread popular anger. Faced with this serious crisis of confidence, how has the Chinese government responded? As only a one-party state can, with mass propaganda. The Communist Party has declared war on SARS. Its senior leaders are shown nightly on television news, visiting the front lines in this new war.
This is not new, this is old. We're seeing this in a similar respect in the new leadership at press conferences, forthright, outspoken, speaking frankly. But that's not structural change. That's not political change. That's all propaganda. I don't think we're seeing in this leadership a recognition that their system is at fault.
In place of reform, the Communist Party is turning to another tried and tested formula: nationalism. Here on the Great Wall outside Beijing, the fight against SARS is being turned into a patriotic campaign. The anti-SARS kite flying may have been a bit of a flop, but that's not the point. This is about building confidence.
We very much feel confident. Very soon, all of this SARS problem will go away.
That is of little consolation to Long May. She sits at home alone, waiting for news of her husband. He remains on the critical list.
SARS should be a lesson to the government, and the media shouldn't stay just a mouthpiece for the Communist Party.
But that's exactly what it continues to be. The crescendo of propaganda drowning out any question of the Communist Party's role in covering up the SARS epidemic. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, Beijing.
In a surprising intervention, European Commission President Romano Prodi has criticised the new draft constitution for the European Union. He said the contents were disappointing, unambitious, and in some respects a step backward. The text was published over the past 2 days by the Convention on the Future of Europe. Mr. Prodi called for the draft to be amended. Chris Morris, our Brussels correspondent, explains why Romano Prodi is so critical of the draft constitution.
Well, the Commission, I think, fears that it could well lose power to the bigger member states. Even though in places like Britain there's been a massive hue and cry about power being handed over to Brussels, many people in Brussels think quite the opposite. They believe that Giscard d'Estaing, the man who's in charge of this constitutional convention, has been listening far too much to the big member states who want to take more control of some decision-making processes, notably with the idea of a permanent president of the European Council replacing the rotating presidency where a different country is in charge every 6 months. The Commission agrees with many of the smaller EU member states that that would weaken the power, A, of smaller countries, but B, of these supranational institutions like the Commission. So, in essence, it's what it always is. It's a battle for power.
So how split is the European Union and its member states on this new draft constitution and the proposals that are in it?
It's such an ambitious document that I think there's undoubtedly something that almost everybody doesn't like. There are areas, I think, where there is convergence, where people agree that sensible reforms are being made to make the system more efficient, more simple to understand. But there are key areas where there's still controversy, notably the institutions, in other words, which institution actually does wield real power. And then on things like majority voting, how many areas of policy should there be where it's a decision to no longer taken unanimously, but when a majority of member states can push policies through. Some people feel that that's absolutely essential when the EU enlarges to include 25 member states. Others fear that they're losing too much of their own national sovereignty. So really, I think they're pulling in very different directions, which is why it's going to be so difficult to come up with a final document.
The US President George Bush has announced a new plan to fight AIDS in Africa and the Caribbean. The legislation commits the US to spend $15 billion over the next 5 years on AIDS prevention and treatment. At a signing ceremony, Mr. Bush said AIDS was filling graveyards, creating orphans and leaving millions in a desperate fight for their lives across Africa. Simon Wright is the UK HIV/AIDS campaign manager with the Action Aid charity. He says the US pledge to Africa is a serious contribution.
Certainly the headline figures of 15 billion are enormous, but they're still not getting anywhere near the amount of money the UN says is needed to fight HIV and AIDS alone every year. It's likely it's going to have an impact on the 14 countries which Bush has identified for support for HIV and AIDS treatment, but we have a number of concerns. There are quite a lot of things underneath the headline figures which are quite worrying.
What's bothering you? I mean, with this kind of generosity, what are the problems?
Well, one concern is we don't really know how it's going to be used. We know that only 1 billion of that will go through the main multilateral funding mechanism, which is the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB and malaria. And that's the only kind of open, democratic, transparent mechanism that we have for dispersing money of this kind to developing countries to help them fight HIV and TB and malaria.
But the money will get to AIDS sufferers, surely?
In some form, but we're not quite sure. There's 14 countries identified for treatment support, and that treatment support is likely to mean support through American pharmaceutical companies rather than proper challenges to help those countries develop their own drugs or be able to produce their own drugs.
Isn't that one of the main problems, though, that people in the third world, poor people, don't really get access to these very expensive drugs and therefore have very short lives?
It's an enormous problem, and unfortunately a lot of things the United States is doing at other times is contradicting that. They're fighting against the right for poor countries to be able to produce generic copies of medicines and to have access to the same technological advances that we have in this country. They're also, generally in terms of a lot of their trade rules, helping to keep a lot of those poor countries poor. And some of the best things that could be done would be to actually fundamentally change the economic situation.
Simon Wright. In Peru, the main opposition party has criticized the government's decision to declare a 30-day state of emergency across the country. It's aimed at trying to contain a wave of strikes and protests. Several members of Congress from the APRA party said the state of emergency could backfire and lead to greater social unrest.
First it was the teachers, then thousands of small farmers and health workers joined the protests, blocking roads and paralyzing public services across Peru. They say they want promised pay increases to be honored and a block on cheap imports that are destroying their livelihoods. The government, its popularity at a new low of around 14%, decided tough action was unavoidable.
La tolerancia tiene un límite.
Tolerance has its limits, Alejandro Toledo told the nation. In order to ensure the stability needed to attract foreign investment, the president said he had no choice but to order a nationwide state of emergency for 30 days. The armed forces and police will be deployed to guarantee personal freedoms, clear the roads and open the schools. The common theme in all these protests is the government's commitment to strict IMF budget guidelines and increased free trade. This teacher says his members are opposed to the privatization of education which these policies promote. The government points to impressive growth figures, but recognizes the benefits aren't being felt widely enough. The unions are already promising a massive general strike for July. One of their leaders says that if President Toledo doesn't change his policy of kneeling to the IMF, he will have to go. Ian Bruce, BBC News.
In Australia, Dr. Peter Hollingworth, the Governor-General, has admitted that he mishandled a child sex scandal when he was an Anglican archbishop. He made the statement on national TV as he explained his reasons for resigning his post. His resignation was linked to two issues, including an unproven 40-year-old rape allegation against him, which he's denied. But it was the child sex scandal which seems to have worked most against him.
As Archbishop of Brisbane, I was called upon to deal with many pastoral problems. And in 1993, I was confronted with a particular case in which I dealt with an allegation of child sex abuse which had occurred many years earlier. When the Anglican Diocese of Brisbane announced its inquiry into this and other cases, I publicly welcomed the initiative and sought to cooperate in every way possible. The board's report made no findings of personal misconduct against me, and in the main exonerated me of all the allegations except this one, where the Board of Inquiry was highly critical. Although acting in good faith, I accept that the decision I made at the time was not the one I would make today. I truly regret the way the matter was handled, and I apologise to those involved who have suffered as a consequence.
Australia's Governor-General explaining the reasons for his resignation. In Ireland, tough laws are being introduced to try and reduce alcohol abuse, especially among young people. Drunkenness is a big problem in Ireland, where the pub is a traditional part of social life. Here's our Dublin correspondent, James Helm.
A night out in Dublin ends in violence. These CCTV pictures show all too familiar scenes of drunkenness and the disorder that follows, according to police and politicians. In a nation known for its fondness of a pint in a pub, alcohol consumption has risen faster in recent years than anywhere else in the European Union. Here in the centre of Dublin and across Ireland in recent years, the number of public order offences has shot up. The Irish police believe alcohol plays a huge part, and the Irish government wants urgent action. It believes so-called binge drinking causes health problems, accidents and serious crime.
Lives are ruined, lives are at risk, injuries are sustained, the work of the police and the health service is hugely damaged by excessive consumption of alcohol.
The government's looking at the nature of alcohol advertising, and it's cracking down on underage drinking. Anyone under 21 will soon need photo ID when buying a drink. But these students say heavy drinking by their age group is only part of a wider problem.
Some people obviously do get drunk, and some people do go out with the intent to get drunk, but it's not at all the majority, you know. And there's people who are 40 and who go out just to get drunk, you know what I mean? It's not a kind of a young people thing, you know.
There should be a whole range of alternatives available for people to socialise that don't necessarily centre around going out and getting hammered on a Friday night.
So what's behind the trend? Commentators point to Ireland's rapid social changes and the increased wealth coming from the country's recent economic boom as factors linked to drinking behaviour.
The diminishing of social controls, the money and a huge presence of young people together on the streets. You combine that with our historical love affair with alcohol and you have the problem we have now.
The drinks industry says it's concerned too and wants to help. A study will explore young people's attitudes to drinking. All sides agree it's about encouraging more responsible behaviour. Ireland is looking for cures to a hangover left by alcohol abuse. James Helm, BBC News, Dublin.
The main news again before I go. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei says the Islamic Republic won't bow to threats from the US. He's accused Washington of trying to strip Iran of its values. The Ayatollah's remarks came in response to a tough warning from the US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld to Iran not to meddle in Iraq. He said that Iran shouldn't try and make Iraq over in its own image. Thanks very much for joining us on BBC World.
Hello and welcome to our world weather. We've seen some very warm nights recently in Saudi Arabia. Temperatures in Riyadh falling below 35 Celsius on Tuesday night, well above the average of 23 Celsius. Now pick up quite a breeze through central parts of Saudi as we go through Thursday. Still clear skies and sunshine for many of the Gulf states. We've also got clear skies across much of India, just a dark area of cloud in the north of the Bay of Bengal, a more speckly, showery cloud just beginning to form in the southeast of the Arabian Sea, the first hints that the monsoon is on its way. Now, we'll be seeing a generally fine and dry picture, still with the heat for many areas. A few showers pushing into Kerala and across Sri Lanka. We could also see some thundery showers up towards Rajasthan and Punjab, with still the risk of some dust storms. Now, we've also got settled weather stretching across the Philippines. Plenty of cloud linked in with our tropical depression. Linfa is still continuing its way northwards, and it's going to push up towards the Japanese islands. We've also got another system across the Korean peninsula, bringing heavy rain into North Korea on Thursday, that transferring down towards Seoul. As that meets up with the warm air associated with this tropical depression, we are going to see some very stormy weather pushing into western Japan. Australia is seeing a lot of fine and dry weather, but there is a little bit of rain pushing up towards parts of New Zealand. And in South America, we'll see the winds beginning to ease around the River Plate area. North America will be cooling off, especially for Ontario, so pick up northerly winds. And it looks like the Midwest will see some outbreaks of rain, and that's going to push towards the eastern seaboard. In Africa, the heat in Cairo will begin to subside by Friday as we lose the southwesterly winds coming from the desert. And in Mediterranean, we're seeing some very heavy downpours. Sardinia seeing 20 millimetres of rain in just 12 hours. You see the lightning strikes from earlier. A whole rash across south and eastern parts of Europe. These look set to continue thanks to the areas of low pressure. We have got high pressure across Scandinavia. That begins to slip off towards the Baltic Sea. But high pressure lingering for Iberia, that means more sunshine. It will be warm as well for many areas. But for Scandinavia, as the sunshine of the midweek, we will begin to see cloud and rain pushing in towards Norway.
Click online, next on BBC World.
Now, more than ever, you need people you can rely on. Credit Suisse.
Introducing Intel Centrino mobile technology. The new wireless laptop technology designed to help you untangle, unburden, and unwire your life.
week, Talking Movies will be travelling to the south of France, to the French Riviera, to meet top international filmmakers and assorted stars who'll be attending this year's Cannes Film Festival.
Asia Today, in 1 hour on BBC World.
Hello, my name is Stephen Cole and welcome to Click Online, the technology show that is pretty as a picture. And I can say that this week because we're focusing on digital photography. And later on I'll be snapping at the heels of a digital photography expert to explain it all to us. So let's see what develops. Coming up. How far have digital cameras come over the years? Are they as good as film cameras? We look at the right camera for you. And what if you already have pictures and film from a traditional camera? We talk you through putting them on your PC. Plus, know your size. Do the French measure up? We look at lasers and fashion in Paris. And Sevi's here to weave her web magic. That's all to come, only on Click Online. But first, let's go to the pictures. We'll be asking, is it time to throw away those old cameras with something called film inside and instead buy a new digital camera without any film? Well, in a moment, we'll be talking about that. But first, let's go across to our resident snappers, Simon Hancock and Chris Long, in full Technicolor. Or should it be black and white?
Cheers, Stephen. See, the big advantage about digital cameras is that you don't need any film.
Although you do need memory for it, otherwise you'll have nowhere to store the pictures.
You can see exactly what picture you've got immediately, and if you don't like it, you just delete it.
Now, inside the camera is what the bods call a CCD.
A charge coupled device. It's the thing that turns light into pictures.
And the bigger the CCD, the better the picture.
We judge the quality of the CCD in terms of megapixels. The more megapixels, the better, and the bigger the images.
Another way of improving quality is by using good lenses. Professional cameras like this use high-quality lenses like this.
While others use smaller lenses of... Sorry. While others like this use smaller lenses of, well, lesser quality. You've been warned. Stephen.
Thanks, Simon. Simon Hancock and Chris Long, both pretty as a picture. And they say the camera doesn't lie. So what's better, the digits or the old film cameras? With me now is Doug Harmon from Total Digital Photography. So we know where he's coming from straight away. What is better, honestly?
It depends what you can use them for, but basically digital cameras give you so much more flexibility to be able to print out at home with your own printer or play with them on computer, email them to relatives. So I think digital has it in terms of flexibility. There are two things you should look out for. There's, first of all, the effective resolution, which is the number of pixels that actually capture the image. A CCD will have a certain number of pixels which are used to transfer that image off into the memory. And then there are another type of camera, such as this Fuji camera here, which uses a super CCD. You can tell it has it on the front. Effectively, it's a camera that uses a CCD which interpolates up the resolution. You don't get any more detail than the effective resolution, but you get a much bigger file size, so it makes nicer prints effectively.
So is it a very clear correlation? The more money you spend, the better quality the photograph?
Yes, basically.
Right, well, fair enough. OK, well, let's look through these cameras, and you can tell me about which cameras are best suited for the right job, or the best job.
OK. This end, the low-end cameras, again, toys, really, OK for email. Perhaps using as a web camera, some of them have that functionality.
Point out which ones.
These ones.
Those two.
They won't have, some do have a zoom, but they'll have a digital zoom. Digital zoom is OK, but you should avoid it because what it effectively does is you use a smaller area of the CCD and magnifies it, so you actually lose resolution. So an already low-resolution camera becomes even lower resolution. Then you've got more consumer-oriented cameras where they're just point and shoot. You pick them up, they have button on the top, turn it to the auto mode, and the camera does everything for you. It's completely automatic. You don't have to think about anything. You just point and shoot.
Point and shoot. And some of the others?
This is an SLR, single lens reflex. It means that it has an interchangeable lens that you can replace with other types of focal lengths, so you can get more flexibility in the things you can photograph. And that just slots on and off the front. And they have all the functions you would ever want from for a professional or indeed enthusiast buy them, but you're looking at £2,000 or £3,000 for some of them. This one is probably about £1,500.
So probably more for the professional?
Yes.
Are professionals, the paparazzi, the news photographers, are they using digitals or film?
Digital mainly because of the speed. They're able to shoot, get the photos onto a memory card into their computer and either telephone them into the office, or they don't have to worry about any of the processing that comes afterwards, which adds time on.
What about the viewfinder? Should you always get one with a viewfinder or screen at the back or not?
Most digital cameras now will come with an LCD screen, which is that bit there, and it acts as a viewfinder. Even some of the cheaper cameras will have an LCD screen, and I'm talking about these low-end ones. They have the LCD on the back. You can get them without an optical viewfinder as well, which is just like a traditional camera where you just view through a port and there's a lens that you look through. And actually that can help save battery power because the LCDs do tend to use up battery.
A lot of batteries, don't they? Mine does.
Yeah. And the pro-end cameras will have an LCD, but it tends to be used for review purposes only because you have a proper optical viewfinder which views through the lens, so you don't need to have an LCD to actually take the image with and use for composition.
Also, the camera I had didn't have a lot of memory. Is it worth buying a lot of memory?
Yes, it is. Normally you get a small memory card, about 16 megabytes. For a camera, say a 3 million pixel camera, you'll only get 1 or 2 images on there at high resolution. So the best thing you need to do is budget for an extra memory card.
And how much more would that cost?
You're looking at about £50 for a 128 megabyte card, something like that. But it does depend on the memory format because there are lots of different types of memory, which is the other thing you need to bear in mind when you buy a camera. They use memory, and not all memory formats are the same. So some cameras take specific types.
Doug, to cut out the laboratory, the film goes straight to a printer. So take us through the process from camera to printer.
OK. Have a camera, remove the memory card from it, and then slot the memory card into the printer. The LCD would normally light up and show you how many images are on there. You can print out an index sheet, which is a sheet with every picture on the memory card as little thumbnails, and then you can select the pictures from that and just print those ones, and then you just print out the image that you've taken.
This is, I have to say, somebody in the Click Online office, and she's obviously making a comment about the programme this week. And Lucy won't be with us for much longer. Thank you, Lucy. Only kidding. But that's about the size you can get, and that's very clear quality. Which camera, by the way, did you use?
This is on one of the SLRs.
Right, so I'm not surprised the quality is so good.
The bigger, the higher the resolution of the camera, the bigger the print you'll be able to make.
So the big question.
Yeah.
Do you think that digital photography will ever replace film photography?
That's a good question. At the moment, manufacturers, camera manufacturers specifically, are starting to talk about actually cease production of film cameras for the consumer end market. Film cameras, I think, will always exist in terms of high-end, high-quality professional use. But I think for the general consumer, within 5 to 10 years, there won't be any film cameras.
Doug, thank you very much. And more from Doug in just a moment. But first, I know what you've been thinking. What are we going to do with all our old photographs? Like these, for example. Well, Chris will tell you. Chris?
Thank you, Stephen. The answer's relatively simple. What you have to do is you have to computerize your picture. And you do that by turning it into digits. And you do that by using a scanner.
The scanner takes a digital picture of your snap, scrunches it up, and sends it to your PC.
And then what you can do is you can manipulate, modify, change, colorize, do anything with your digital picture, just like it had come from a digital camera. Stephen.
Yes. Perhaps he should stick to film. Right, so that's digital cameras. Let's move on to scanners. Doug, can you get as good a result on a scanner as you can on a film camera?
Yes, you can. Basically, with a scanner like this one, this is a flatbed scanner that has an adapter at the top for putting your prints in. You'll be able to scan images at a higher resolution even than a digital camera, so you can get some very good results.
All right, show us how it works.
Okay, with this particular model, you have a feeder here where you get a print and you can slot prints in here. It'll be taken through the machine and come out there, automatically scanning on the way through, and it would appear on the screen on PC. The other way of doing it with a flatbed scanner that doesn't have one of these hoods is you would place the prints onto the glass. The lid would actually then be back on top, and the printer would scan in the same way.
Just ordinary scanners, sort that people have with their PCs?
Yes, but you do get ones, again, like this one. It has an adapter for scanning slide film or negatives, and this would sit on the top in place of a print. You have an adapter where the negatives would sit with its own light source.
That's the white bit at the back, I see.
That shines light through the negative down onto the sensor that's in the scanner, and again it would just appear on your screen as it scans.
It's a big bit of kit, isn't it?
It is. You can get flatbed scanners that don't have any of this paraphernalia, and they're obviously going to be a lot less expensive. You're looking at around, say, $100, $150. Something like this probably be $300 with all its different parts.
A lot of people's old films, old negs anyway, are damaged, cracked, scratched. Can they be, well, let's have a look. I mean, that's an example of one of mine. Can they be repaired with the scanner?
Well, a negative like that, or a
pretty bad
print with dust and scratches, you would scan them in, and actually it's a really, really good way to repair old photographs. If you've got old family photos, things like that, that perhaps are fading even, you can scan them in and even replace colour that's been lost. So it's an ideal way to save old photos, family photos, things like that.
Doug, so the scanners can actually mend photographs. It can also correct the scratches. But what about poor old Lucy, old yellow Lucy?
That photograph was taken by a camera that wasn't set correctly for the light. Even a household bulb will produce a yellow cast on a picture unless the camera's set up properly. But it's really easy to fix that on a computer using software.
And is it expensive, the software?
It's between, say, $30 and $100. You can even get professional software that goes up to about $500. So it's actually, on the lower end software, easier to do. Use those automatic buttons, you just click and the software does it for you. The professional level stuff you can tweak for as long as you like. So,
Doug, that's really good news. Nice way to end. Thank you very much indeed, Doug Harmon. And still to come on Click Online, we'll see the French resizing their clothes by computer. And Sevi's here with her review of the web. That's all to come only on Click Online. Welcome back to Click Online. Now, in the first part of the show, we looked at scanners that pulled in images from film and photographs. Now, they are fine for grabbing flat pictures, but what about scanning in 3 dimensions? How would you scan something, say, lumpy, like a body? Well, in an effort to build up an image of the modern population, the French are doing just that. David Reed in the French city of Lyon explains.
Over the next 2 years, France is sizing up 15,000 of its population. It's a daunting task by any measure, and it's all being done in the name of fashion. Ever had the feeling that your body is not quite as off the peg as the clothes you're wearing? Legs too short, bottom too big, waist a little generous. It's all good news for Madame Paolo here. It keeps her in business. Clothes sizes in shops are based on measurements carried out decades ago. Here in France, it's been 30 years since they've updated their sizing system. In that time, body shapes and the technology used to measure them have changed dramatically. It's why France's Clothing and Textiles Institute is urging 15,000 people to strip down to their underwear. They aim to create a database of body shapes and are using the most sophisticated scanning technology and 3D imaging software to do it. Traditional tape measures and calipers still play a supporting role for some measurements, but the star of the show is a full-body scanner equipped with 4 lasers. The volunteer takes up position, an action man pose. Then 4 harmless, sweeping beams of red laser trace out every curve and contour of the body. Information that would take a man armed with just a tape measure hours to gather, here takes a couple of seconds. In fact, the 4 lasers generate enough data for the software to produce a perfect 3-dimensional clone. The measurers have dubbed this clone a green Martian. It's ruthlessly accurate. Every roll, lump and bump is rendered in perfect detail. From this 3D copy, the software can instantaneously carry out 97 different measurements. For the project's organizer, Cathy Fournière, scanner and software have given researchers a physical form to work with, whereas before they had just a list of numbers.
It means we can now work on people's postures to see if their backs are bent, their busts larger, legs shorter. We can always come back to these images and make whatever classifications we have to in 3D.
It was in the early 70s that the French clothes industry last measured up its clientele. The fashions and the bodies they hang from have moved on a bit since then. French men are taller and heavier. The svelte 60s girl has been nudged aside by a weightier, modern woman. It means that, like all of us, the French often have to take scissors, needle and thread to their new clothes.
Young people are bigger these days. The trousers are not the right size. The fashion designers should think about this.
Car manufacturers are also expected to use the data collected during the measuring campaign. Long-suffering frequent flyers will hope that the designers of airline seating might at least glance at the data.
David Reed taking measurements in France, although, frankly, I prefer a tape measure, and it has to be warmed at the metal end. Now it's time to check out some of the technology stories behind the headlines this week. Chat room messages critical of the Chinese government either never appear or are purged from chat rooms. According to a study by free speech pressure group Reporters Without Borders, more than 70% of messages that mentioned sensitive political topics appeared in chat rooms, but were generally removed after a few hours. Apple could find itself in legal hot water with its iTunes music service, launched to popular acclaim early this month. Resourceful Mac users have figured out how to hack the jukebox software to stream their music over the entire internet, and not just over local networks as Apple intended. The company says it's monitoring the trend, adding that iTunes is intended only for personal use. Microsoft UK have announced their latest big idea, the iLoo. Due to be unveiled during Britain's Glastonbury Music Festival, the iLoo, as its name suggests, is a toilet with internet connections. No doubt following extensive usability testing at Microsoft HQ, cubicles will have broadband access, a fold-down keyboard, and even play music. Mac users, insert joke here. And last of all, an industry which has surpassed Hollywood in revenues: gaming. E3, the world's biggest gaming extravaganza, has passed off in Los Angeles. Lots of the customary insider backslapping and game playing disguised as business. And were we there? Well, you bet we were. A full report in next week's show, when we'll be checking out everything from new graphics-crunching PC titles to announcements of portable consoles. Game on, gamers. It's time for our web wonder, Sivan Bastagian, to take us through the sites that she's picked out for us this week. Over to you, Sevi.
Thanks, Stephen, and welcome to another Webscape. This week I've got an eclectic mix of sites, two of which focus on community-based learning, so let's kick off with those. Actually, kicking off is exactly right in the case of footballculture.net, recommended by Adam Edmert in Slovakia. Romantics might try to tell you that the only true international language is love, but they would probably struggle to persuade the people behind this site. The aim of Football Culture is to explore the culture of the beautiful game around the world and is a joint initiative by the BBC and the British Council. In so doing, the global community gets to practice their English, talking about the sport they love. Sounds like the best way to learn a language, if you ask me. Forum debates with topics like football and race, should women footballers be paid the same as men, get responses from all over the world. I saw entries from Nepal, Malaysia, South Africa, Germany, and many more. And if you feel strongly about the subject being discussed, add your own views too. Football English is an entertaining area which develops your English language skills through quizzes, games, and word tests, all on the subject of footy. Stretch your soccer lingo with this flash-generated quiz. There are some great phrases, and let's just say it's not a walk in the park. But is it a game of two halves? And on your red son? And, well, you get the idea. There's so much to look at on this attractively designed site. It's well worth bookmarking for a return visit. Thanks now to Raoul Koskia from Johannesburg, South Africa, for this next site. If you're interested in digital photography, then take a look at the massively popular dpreview.com. From its humble beginnings in 1998, it's grown to become one of the definitive sites on digital photography and imaging, notching up a whopping 5 million unique users a month. The camera database is a great resource if you want to compare and contrast the specifications of current models on the market. All the major brands are represented. Clicking on a particular make will bring up their stock in reverse chronological order, meaning you get to see the newest ones on the market up at the top. If you're bamboozled by all the info that's given to you, just use the handy features search tool and the results will deliver the products most suited to your preferences. If you want to familiarise yourself with the language of cameras and digital imaging, then the glossary is well organised and covers terms in a good level of detail. If you come across any digital imaging sites that look at the output rather than the camera itself, whether it's digital art or new imaging techniques, drop me a line at the usual address and I'll pass it on. And finally, if you've had your fill of television news and want to get stuck into the papers, take a look at the impressive thepaperboy.com. It's an Australian-based portal linking you to over 5,000 newspapers from around the world. The site design is bold and relatively easy to use. Apart from the standard way to access content by country, a nifty tool enables you to submit a headline you're interested in reading. The meta search engine trawls through 7 major online news site databases and delivers the papers writing about your topic of interest. There are an impressive array of papers from around the world, from Bhutan to Bolivia and over to Botswana, a truly global viewpoint accessed so easily. That's about it from me. Keep sending in your favourite websites, won't you? Stephen, it's back to you.
Thanks, Sev. Well, I'm afraid the timer on the camera has finally expired. Don't worry if you've missed anything. It's all there, including a streamed version of the show on our website, bbcworld.com/clickonline. Don't forget, we do want to hear your thoughts on all technology matters, plus suggestions for websites worth looking at, and your technological queries, and they're very important to us. Oh, and by the way, you may even want to send us any interesting digital pictures you've taken. The address, click online at bbc.co.uk. But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the team, until the next time we click online, it's goodbye.
From the world's largest broadcast news operation, BBC News is next.
Britain special? What makes Britain exciting or even eccentric? Well, we British, of course, have our views, but the real experts are those foreign correspondents who live and work here. Every week I'll be asking them to tell you what they think of us. Join me, Gavin Esler, for an international view of the United Kingdom. Dateline London, this weekend at these times on BBC World.
As events unfold, watch them live on BBC World.
For the first time since the war in Iraq, world leaders are convening for the G8 summit. With the fight against terrorism and the reconstruction of Iraq high on the agenda, stay abreast of the discussions, starting this weekend.
Follow the news as it happens on BBC World.
Hello, I'm Arthur C. Clarke. See me discuss life, the universe, and the internet on Click Online at these times on BBC World.
Asia Today, in 30 minutes on BBC World.
Iranian leaders warn the United States, stop threatening our country. President Khatami tells an Islamic conference Iraq must decide its own future. 2 people are killed after a helicopter crashes on Mount Everest. And Amnesty International says the US-led war on terror has made the world a more dangerous place. Hello, I'm Nisha Pillay. Welcome to BBC World News. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says the Islamic Republic won't bow to threats from the US. He accused Washington of trying to strip Iran of its values. The Ayatollah's remarks came after the US Defense Secretary issued a tough warning to Iran not to meddle in the post-war destiny of neighboring Iraq. Donald Rumsfeld warned Iran it was on notice. Any attempt to remake Iraq in Iran's image would be aggressively put down. Washington's also accused Tehran of harboring members of al-Qaeda and of trying to develop nuclear weapons. Mr. Rumsfeld also claimed that Saddam Hussein's regime may have destroyed its weapons of mass destruction before the war began. He said it would take time to check all the suspected sites, though.
The 57 member countries of the Organization of the Islamic Conference gathered for the opening session to hear the Iranian president call for an elected government in Iraq as soon as possible. All Islamic countries expect a political regime chosen by the Iraqi people to quickly take control, President Khatami said, and he insisted it was a demand supported by world public opinion. Democratic elections would be likely to put Iraq's Shia majority into power, a move which Iran would welcome, having sheltered key Iraqi opposition figures in recent years. The Syrian delegate stressed the need for broader representation.
It must be broadly presenting all spectrum, political spectrum in Iraq, all ethnic and religious groups.
Without naming the United States and British coalition, President Khatami finally called for the occupying powers to leave Iraq. The Americans had earlier warned Iran in strong terms not to meddle in Iraq's affairs.
Interference in Iraq by its neighbors or their proxies will not be permitted. Indeed, Iran should be on notice that efforts to try to remake Iraq in Iran's image will be aggressively put down.
The Americans have been increasing the pressure on Iran, part of what President Bush called the axis of evil, and accusing Iran of developing nuclear weapons. And American intelligence has suggested that the recent suicide bombings in Saudi Arabia were the work of al-Qaeda operatives in Iran. Iran said it did not support al-Qaeda, nor did it have secret nuclear facilities. In Iraq, despite small finds of chemicals like these and a mobile factory empty of its supposed biological contents, which inspectors will investigate, no weapons of mass destruction have been found. Mr. Rumsfeld argued there was a reason.
It could be because it's hard to find things in a country that's determined not to have you find them. and we'll just take our time and we'll go about that business.
Weapons of mass destruction were the coalition's main reason for the invasion of Iraq. For Iraqis, the main concern is security and rebuilding the country. The top priority promised by the new UN envoy to Iraq, who plans to begin work by next Monday. Jane Bennett-Powell, BBC News.
And I asked Sadiq Zibakalam, Professor of Political Science at Tehran University, how seriously the Iranians are taking the US's threats.
Well, there are certain quarters of Iranians who are concerned about the U.S. threat. But evidently from the speech which we heard from the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, he wasn't at all worried about the U.S. threat. He was very firm, he was very robust, and his speech was very powerful.
But this is coming at a time when the religious establishment is under a great deal of pressure, not just from the US, but also is deeply unpopular internally too, isn't it?
It is so. The reformists have been saying to the Supreme Leader and to the Conservatives that if you really want to stand up against the United States, then you better do something about the image of the Islamic regime and the unpopularity of the Islamic regime. But Ayatollah Khamenei dismissed all this, and he was very firm, and in fact he ridiculed the reformists, which a couple of days ago wrote an open letter to the Ayatollah Khamenei about these issues, and Ayatollah Khamenei was very firm. He dismissed the U.S. threat, he dismissed the reformist criticism, and he sounded very strong.
This showdown between the religious establishment led by Ayatollah Khamenei and the reformers led by President Khatami has been going on for some time now. Can we tell which side may have the upper hand?
Well, initially the reformists had the upper hand, but ever since the United States attack on Iraq and the fall of Saddam, because of the patriotism, because of the nationalistic feeling, because of religious sentiments, it seems that the conservatives are getting the upper hand as far as propaganda war is concerned with the reformists.
Professor Zibakalam speaking to us from Tehran. Within the last few minutes, a U.S. spokesman has said President Bush will hold 2 Middle East peace summits next week, one with Arab leaders in Egypt, another in Jordan with King Abdullah. If all goes to plan, President Bush will be joined by the Israeli and Palestinian prime ministers. In Saudi Arabia, several men have been arrested in connection with the recent suicide bombings in the capital, Riyadh. Most of the arrests were made in Medina, the Muslim holy city. A Saudi source said one of those arrested is believed to be one of the key architects of the Riyadh attacks. 34 people died in the 3 bombings earlier this month. A Russian-built helicopter carrying 9 people has crashed just outside the perimeter of Everest Base Camp. Of the 9 people on board, 2 were killed, all Nepali crew members. The accident happened on the 5th day of celebrations to mark the conquest of Everest by Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary.
The helicopter was coming in to pick up a group of climbers. In order to land, it had to circle over base camp. Then, just as it neared the helipad, its wheels clipped a building. The rotor blades can be seen flying in the air, but luckily the whole helicopter didn't explode in flames. Instead, it smouldered on the ground.
Am I saying things right? Is the helicopter just crashed? Correct, crash.
The wreckage was soon surrounded by people trying to lift it up and pull out the survivors and the dead who were trapped beneath. The helicopter behind me crashed about 15 minutes ago. We think they've pulled some people from the wreckage, but the terrible thing is there are still live pilots or possibly passengers trapped underneath in this glacial stream, which is freezing cold. Everyone's trying to lift up the helicopter some way